Hello, Year 10. I hope this finds you well and you've been working hard. So, today we are going to be looking at an extract from the Prelude by William Wordsworth, who you've probably heard of before. He wrote a lot of romantic poetry, and this poem is about him stealing a boat and how he grew from that. So how he discovered things from that. So it's also been known as the boat stealing episode and growth of a poet's mind. And it has those nicknames because it's part of a longer poem that he wrote about his entire life, which has 14 chapters. But that's for another day. So it's autobiographical and it's a true story. So let's have a look at where we are in history. Romantic poetry came after the Industrial Revolution and before World War One. So the UK went through this massive urbanisation where everybody moved to cities and there were lots of factories built. Science was looked into more, technology became a real thing of interest. And that's when Charles Dickens was working. He wrote A Christmas Carol. And so as a kind of backlash to that, the Romantic poets said that they didn't really want to live this life in the cities with all of the factories and the urbanisation. Instead, they would rather be more connected to nature, and they wanted to highlight the beauty of nature and their love for it. And they didn't want to live by those rules anymore. So then a bit of a long time after that, you can see we get to World War One, and you studied Bayonet Charge and Exposure, which were both set in World War One. So I just wanted to put it in a timeline for you. Okay, so we've looked at where it is in time. Let's look at where the poem is set in the country. So it's set in the north of England, in the Lake District, which is a very beautiful place. I would encourage you all to visit if you can. So the Lake District is protected, so there's not much man-made structures in the Lake District. You'll just see huge expanses of water and huge peaks here that are hills or mountains, and you can see the vast sky above you as well. And I suppose it's good to imagine, before we look at this poem, how it might feel to stand beneath these enormous natural things, and how it might make you feel. I expect it might make you feel quite small in comparison, and that is what this poem really is about. Okay, so I have told you some information. There's some written information here, and I would like you to pause the video, please, and summarise it into 4 bullet points. Okay, well done. Now let's look at the poem. One summer evening, led by her, I found a little boat tied to a willow tree, within a rocky cove its usual home. Straight I unloosed her chain, and stepping in, pushed from the shore. So here the speaker is stealing a boat. He has been led by her. Her in this poem is nature personified. And nature, he's seduced by nature here. She leads him to this little boat. And he doesn't feel bad about stealing it, really. He's just going ahead and taking whatever he likes from nature. It was an act of stealth and troubled pleasure, so he knows it's against the rules, really, but he doesn't really mind. He kind of likes that. He gets pleasure from it. And he rows out onto the lake. Now, as he rows, he describes the lake as very beautiful, so small circles glittering idly in the moon until they melted all into one track of sparkling light. So it's a real peaceful tone at the beginning here. And so let's just take a look then how he feels about this. But now, like one who rows, proud of his skill to reach a chosen point with an unswerving line. So he's rowing and he's pleased with himself, basically. He's proud of his skill. He's seen a chosen point on the horizon and he said, I'm going to get there. And with an unswerving line, he rows. So this pride here man's sort of arrogant pride that he is the best at something, and that can link to My Last Duchess, where the speaker is proud of his kind of ownership over the Duchess. And so really that's a flaw of man, I think, pointed out by this poet. So let's talk about form quickly before we move on. It's written in blank verse, and that means that there are no stanzas, and that was really quite irregular for this kind of era, and it was a rebellion against the rules, really. So mostly poets were writing in stanzas, and this one isn't. So it's more a stream of consciousness, of freedom, of, you know, in wild nature. Blank verse does seem like the kind of the way you'd like to write, to reflect that wild nature. And interestingly, it can be contrasted to the poem London, which I don't think you've done yet, but you will do. And London is very structured. It's written in stanzas, and it's obviously about a city. So the two poems contrast in that sense. Okay, so he's got the boat. He's feeling good about it. He's looking around himself. It's all very beautiful. And he's looking up at this craggy ridge. So let's just have a look quickly at this image more carefully. So when you row backwards. So he's got in the boat here by the willow trees, and he's rowing with his back facing this way. So he's rowing out. He can see this craggy ridge. He's fine with everything, looking around, having a nice time. As he gets a bit further, his line of vision, these arrows are what he can see, his line of vision goes from being able to see the stars at this point, so there's nothing between him and the stars here, which must be quite a nice feeling, and then he gets to point B, and another peak kind of rises up behind that craggy ridge, and he realizes that behind what he thought was there's something else that's huge, peak, black and huge. So it doesn't sound that nice. It sounds quite scary, and he definitely feels intimidated by it. It makes him feel small. So huge peak makes him feel small. And the fact it's black also suggests that it's quite a dark piece of matter here. It suggests the unknown, that it's black. So here he describes that first peak as an elfin pinnacle, and his carrot continues rowing, and then here, the horizon's bound, a huge peak, black and huge, as if with voluntary power instinct, upreared its head. So he's personifying nature again here. He's personifying this peak, and he's saying that it's on its own, it's upreared its head. So he's giving it semi-supernatural power here. Let's see how he deals with that. So he describes it a little bit more for a few lines here. He calls it a grim shape, and it towered up between me and the stars. With purpose of its own, it strode after me. So all quite scary, monster-like imagery really here. And let's have a look at how he acts. So this quotation here is the best one that shows the change in tone from being quite confident and inspired by nature to being fearful of it and being scared. So with trembling oars, I turned. So he's decided that he's going to turn his boat around and head back. And that's quite interesting because he knows it's there now, so it's always going to be there. For him, that knowledge that that peak is there, but still he wants to not be able to see it anymore. So he'll have turned his back on it and rowed back in. And in this rowing back, you can see that it's just two lines really. With trembling oars I turned, and through the silent water stole my way back to the cover of the willow tree. No description of how beautiful things are anymore. He just wants to get back to the willow tree because he's been very intimidated by this black peak. And so then he leaves his boat there, and he goes home. So here we've got meadows home, and through the meadows homeward went in grave and serious mood. And it plays on his mind for a long time afterwards. So no familiar shapes remained. No pleasant images of trees, of sea or sky, no colours of green fields, but huge and mighty forms. So he can't anymore remember the normal things that he used to like about life. He can just think of this huge and mighty form, and they trouble his dreams. So they move slowly through the mind by day and were a trouble to my dreams. So he's really been profoundly changed and left with some questions about life. And I think if you're aiming for the higher levels at GCSE, it's interesting to think about this peak here as being a metaphor for death. So he is continuing with his life, having a nice time as he rows out, and then he realises at some point, as everyone does, I suppose, in their life, that at some point he is going to die, and therefore his life is fundamentally changed because he's had this realisation, and it will never leave him again. It kind of plagues him from then onwards. So that's just one interpretation of that. Okay, so that's the poem. I'd like you to have a go at consolidating your understanding of the poem. Hopefully you've been making some notes as I've been reading. If not, no problem. You could watch this video again and do that. I think that's probably a very helpful way to kind of absorb the knowledge in these videos. And then have a go at this activity. So I'm asking you, why might Wordsworth have written the poem? And I want you to use these different words here to start you off. So I'll have a go at the first one. So to criticise, so if I think about what he's criticising here, it's definitely man. And I would say man's pride, or man's ignorance, or man's kind of naive confidence, maybe. So his ignorance means that he doesn't really know what's out there, and that's a kind of naivety of man. It's a stupidity of man, really, that he doesn't accept that there's more to life than he already knows. So if you have a go at those other questions, and good luck with the quiz at the end of the week. Take care, everybody.